Hello, friends. It's Angela from Create, Heal, Shine. Welcome to the podcast. Today we're discussing conditioned emotions. So, conditioned emotions are basically a lot of the ways that we think and feel that relate to how we were brought up or how we were raised, that kind of thing. And conditioned emotions come out in us sometimes when we're not even realizing it. And we can't deny that we have these things because they affect the way that we think, the thoughts that we believe, unless we recondition our mind to think other thoughts and to choose to live in a different way. But the reality is, as you reach adulthood, we all have been raised to believe certain patterns, and we've been raised to react even by different life's challenges or things that happen to us. So maybe you can remember back to your childhood when one of your parents, you said something or you did something and they had a facial expression, or they said something, and that kind of facial expression or thought, if you can look at your life honestly today, or maybe a little while ago, if you've been doing a lot of thought work, you can say, wow, yeah, I've done that. When my child did this, I had that same reaction. Or when my husband did this, or when this thing happened to them, you watched your parents or your family members, or even teachers or friends. It can be anyone in your life, but you've watched the way that they've reacted to certain scenarios and situations, and you can see yourself doing those same things. And I'm sure a lot of times that they're not always positive. Like, I can remember saying to myself one time, somebody reacted to me in a certain way. And as I grew up, I thought, I am never going to be like that person, because I remember how deeply it hurt and how badly my feelings were hurt at the time, because I was just a young girl. And yet I will catch myself doing or saying something or reacting like that. But at least now I have the self-awareness where I can say, oh, wow, I just did exactly what I swore I'd never do as I got older. But those are the kinds of patterns and habits that we grow up with, and we have to, if we are so desire to change those patterns, like most of us, if you're listening here, are, they're pretty significant. And so each of us have learned different ways of reacting to things. And then, so when we're faced with different challenges or ideas or situations, some of us may do what we used to do and shut down. Maybe that's what our mother did when something happened to her, or she was yelled at, or somebody did something or said something. Others create anger or have severe anxiety or react with laughing and think everything is funny, like a comedy. Maybe someone in your family member behave that way, and then you find yourself reacting that same way, like that something's really funny, but you don't mean to do that. It just comes out. And it's okay. You're human. It's natural to have those reactions because they're conditioned. And that's what I mean when we discuss conditioned emotions. So what determines all of how we react are all the different people involved in our life, all the things that they've been through based on their conditioning, because they have all learned this from somebody, or something has happened along the way. And sometimes it is called generational patterning. And it can go through so many generations that we don't even know what generation it began, because we can't trace it back that far. But understanding this is really powerful, because you can change the way you look at life. You can change the way your beliefs are in life. You don't have to have the beliefs of somebody else. But don't think that it can only happen in childhood. It can also happen in adulthood. You have the friends you hang around with, your loved ones, or certain relationships that you have. As you grow, you may find yourself taking on their beliefs, and you really don't have that same belief, but you find yourself taking it on and saying things that you normally wouldn't say, or maybe you don't even believe at all. And that's why it's so important to understand these conditioned emotions, so that when we do that, we're not perfect, and that those things happen, but then we can change it going forward, and we can catch ourselves. And a lot of this, you can't really blame ourselves, because like as children, we are dependent on our parents. We are dependent on them for everything, for food, for shelter, for clothing. You depend on them for everything to do with survival. And so when they react a certain way to us, either verbal or nonverbal, we take on that expression. And sometimes that is even called vicarious conditioning. And it happens to adults and children, both in any age can do that. And that's what I mean by maybe you're in a relationship where you've taken on some beliefs or some thoughts or some reactions from the person that you're around the most. And you find yourself saying some things that they're saying, and it just comes out. So there's learned reaction, conditioned reactions, and vicarious conditioning. And sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative. I can remember when being around my grandma, she was just so easygoing and so lighthearted. I loved her reaction to things. She would always be like, "Oh well, that kind of thing happens, no big deal." If something happened in front of her presence, she would make you feel better. She would make you feel like it wasn't your fault. And I've been in many situations where it was completely the opposite growing up. So those are the kind of conditions that I appreciate learning and feel grateful to understand. But there's a lot of negative emotions as well. Um, Sometimes both positive and negative. But say we feel anxious about something that we're doing, and that is a conditioned emotion, but we're not technically that same person that feels that anxiety, but yet we become conditioned to feel this way. And same with sadness and depression. And sadness can also be a mood, but there's other feelings such as overwhelm that you may notice that you've taken on from other family members, where they get really overwhelmed really easy. And so you find yourself getting overwhelmed really easy, and you say, "Oh, I just got that from my mom was always like that, so I'm like that." But you can see how we take on those beliefs and those reactions, and they might not even be our own. So it's a really great thing to pause sometimes when maybe you've had a reaction that you didn't really like, and realize it wasn't really coming from the true you, your true authentic self, who you are. And since we're just talking about that right now, our true authentic self, if you're trying to notice where it's coming from, if it's actually coming from your authentic thoughts and behaviors, but you're not quite sure, you can go back and look at and think about your values and what you value in life and what you believe to be true. And if those things don't align, then it's usually coming from conditioning. So a lot of times, then this may be remarks that you've heard somebody say or you grew up with, and you know that they're definitely not the way that you feel, but yet you remember times where stuff has come out of your mouth that you've said certain kind of comments that you do not believe. And unfortunately, when we say things, we can't get them back. And so being aware of what we're doing and seeing if things align with our own true values or not are so important. And there's so many different kind of values that we can align with, like compassion and adventure and joy and safety and independence and expression, community. And the list goes on and on and on. I know that there's hundreds of different values. And when we are misaligned with that, it takes some noticing to pull back and say, oops, I didn't really mean that. I'm sorry. That just came out. And you can make changes to that. Also, as we're growing up, the more that we're exposed to something, the more that it starts to take hold, because our brain loves things and thoughts that are familiar, and it hates going against the unfamiliar. And that's why things like losing weight and different things are so difficult for some people, because our mind loves to create pictures of things, and it loves what's familiar. So it wants to keep eating the same food. It wants to keep doing the same thing. And so when we're trying to break habits and create new, fresh habits, our body, it takes so many new thoughts and patterns and habits to make changes to that, so that we can start losing the weight or feeling better or whatever our new habit is that we're trying to create. And so you can do it. You definitely can do it. And you just have to realize, to be, number one, you need to be self-aware of what you're saying, doing, and reacting. And number two, you need to notice, is this coming from a conditioned thought or emotion? Or is this coming from my own true, authentic thought, value, and belief? And once we do that, there are so many other possibilities. And by doing those things, you're interrupting the pattern. And that's the only way to stop continuing with those same belief cycles, is to interrupt and interrupt and interrupt. And really, it takes constant work to do that. And so I just wanted to give you some thoughts on different journal prompts that you could use to break through some of these patterns and conditioned emotions, or learned emotions, reactions, or beliefs. And I just wanted to give you some thoughts to think about. Maybe that will help you work through that. So some questions are, what kind of thoughts and patterns do you recall that you are doing now that you are reflecting from something in your childhood? And that's a really great thing to journal on. And you can also think of the journal prompt, how did people around you deal with stress or challenging situations? What did you learn about happiness? How did you and your family express happiness? And the same with fear. How did you learn about fear? And how is that expressed growing up? Or even now as an adult? And what kind of thoughts and beliefs have you noticed as an adult that you have taken on from another adult relationship? So I hope that some of those journal prompts help you figure out some of where things are coming from. But just know that all it takes to make huge changes is to interrupt that pattern and make choices that are more unfamiliar, and get away from the familiar by breaking those habits and thoughts and routines that we have so instilled in us. And make sure that when you make choices or decisions, that they're aligned with what you truly believe. So thanks so much for listening today, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye, friends.